My father stood in the center of my sister's wedding reception with a glass raised high and a proud smile across his face. More than 200 guests turned their attention toward him as he cleared his throat. Then he looked directly at me and proudly announced that he was still paying for my college education because, in his words, I still needed his help to become successful. A few people laughed politely. Others gave me sympathetic looks that made my stomach twist. My sister smiled like she had just won another competition. My mother looked completely satisfied. They believed they had embarrassed me in front of everyone. What nobody in that ballroom knew was that I had already graduated months earlier, built my own career without their support, and earned enough money to stand on my own. When my father handed me the microphone expecting another quiet thank you, he unknowingly handed me the opportunity to tell the truth that would change the entire night. My name is Ethan, and for as long as I can remember, my younger sister Madison was the center of our parents' world. Every success she had was treated like history being made. Every mistake she made was quickly forgiven or blamed on someone else. Growing up beside her felt like living in the shadow of a giant spotlight that never pointed in my direction. I was not ignored completely, but I was never celebrated either. If I earned excellent grades, my parents congratulated me over dinner and immediately changed the subject. If Madison finished a school project or won a small award, our house became a celebration for days. As we got older, the difference only became more obvious. When Madison turned 18, my father surprised her with a brand new car sitting in the driveway with a giant red ribbon on top. The entire family came over to celebrate. When I started college and asked if they could help me buy textbooks for my engineering classes, my father suggested I find a weekend job because, according to him, hard work built character. I never complained because I had already accepted that expecting equal treatment would only leave me disappointed. Instead of arguing, I focused on building a future that depended on nobody except myself. College became the place where my life finally started changing. I studied harder than anyone around me because failure was never an option. I applied for every scholarship I could find, accepted difficult internships, and spent weekends working while other students relaxed. There were nights when I barely slept because I was balancing classes, projects, and part-time work at the same time. It was exhausting, but every sacrifice brought me one step closer to independence. The small amount of financial help my parents occasionally offered always came with reminders that I owed them my future. So I learned very quickly that the less I depended on them, the freer I became. Meanwhile, Madison lived a completely different life. She loved expensive restaurants, shopping trips, vacations, and parties with friends. My parents happily paid for almost everything because they believed she deserved the best. Whenever I visited home, every conversation somehow revolved around her newest achievement, her latest relationship, or her future plans. I rarely mentioned my own life because nobody seemed interested enough to ask. After a while, silence became easier than disappointment. Everything became even worse after Madison got engaged to her boyfriend, Brandon. From the moment he proposed, the wedding became the only thing anyone in the family cared about. Every holiday dinner turned into a planning meeting. Every phone call became another request for help. They wanted my opinion only when they needed free labor. I was expected to visit venues, move decorations, meet vendors, drive relatives around town, and spend every weekend helping with wedding preparations. It did not matter that I had responsibilities of my own. If I said I was busy, my mother accused me of being selfish. If I explained that I had deadlines at work, my father reminded me that family should always come first. The funny part was that nobody even knew what I actually did for a living anymore. 6 months before the wedding, I had graduated earlier than expected because I completed extra credits and internship requirements ahead of schedule. A software company offered me a remote position before graduation, and I accepted immediately. The salary was far better than I had imagined, and after taking on freelance projects during evenings, my income grew even faster. I was finally living comfortably, paying my own bills, saving money, and planning to buy my first home before turning 30. My parents never asked about any of it because every conversation somehow returned to Madison and her wedding. 3 weeks before the ceremony, my father called me while I was finishing a project for work. His voice sounded unusually serious. He did not ask how I was doing or whether work was going well. Instead, he immediately started criticizing me for missing another wedding planning dinner. According to him, Madison felt hurt, my mother was disappointed, and I was becoming an embarrassment to the family. I listened quietly because I already knew exactly where the conversation was heading. Finally, he delivered the same threat he had used against me for years. He said that if I continued refusing to support my sister properly, he and my mother would stop paying my college tuition. He spoke with complete confidence because he believed those words still gave him power over me. I almost smiled while listening because he had no idea that his threat meant absolutely nothing anymore. I had not needed tuition money for months. My degree was finished. My career had already begun. The version of me he believed he controlled no longer existed. Instead of correcting him, I simply thanked him for his concern and told him I would do my best to be there. His voice immediately became softer because he believed he had won. After ending the call, I leaned back in my chair and laughed quietly to myself. For the first time in my life, I realized they were trying to pull strings that were no longer attached to anything. The control they believed they still had disappeared months earlier. They just had not noticed because they had been too busy planning the perfect wedding. Over the next 2 weeks, I attended every event they requested. I helped carry decorations, greeted guests, moved tables, and smiled through endless conversations about flower arrangements and seating charts. Everyone assumed I had finally accepted my place in the family again. Madison acted sweeter than usual because she believed she had won another battle. My parents looked relieved because they thought their old method of control still worked. I never argued. I never corrected them. Sometimes the strongest response is allowing people to believe their own story until the truth exposes it for you. 2 days before the wedding, my cousin accidentally emailed me the final reception schedule instead of another family member. As I read through the program, one section immediately caught my attention. It listed speeches from relatives, including one from my parents about family values and sacrifice. At the bottom of the page, my name appeared with a note saying I would be giving a thank you speech after my father's remarks. Suddenly, everything made sense. They had planned the entire evening around presenting themselves as generous parents and me as the struggling son who still depended on them. They wanted hundreds of guests to believe they were still carrying me through life while celebrating Madison as the perfect daughter. They had no idea that their carefully planned moment was about to become something completely different. The wedding day arrived, and the entire country club looked like something out of a magazine. Fresh flowers covered every table, a live band played soft music, and guests admired every expensive detail my parents had paid for. The moment I walked inside, I noticed how unusually confident my family looked. My father barely greeted me before saying, "We are glad you finally remembered what family means." I simply smiled because arguing would have ruined the surprise waiting for them later that evening. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Madison and Brandon exchanged vows, everyone applauded, and dozens of cameras captured every emotional moment. During dinner, relatives laughed, shared stories, and congratulated the newlyweds. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Then the speeches began, and I realized the reception was unfolding exactly as I expected. My mother spoke first. She praised Madison for becoming such a wonderful daughter and thanked everyone for celebrating with our family. Slowly, her speech shifted toward the sacrifices parents make for their children. She proudly described the money, time, and opportunities she and my father had given us throughout our lives. At first, it sounded harmless, but I knew where she was leading the conversation. She wanted every guest to believe they had carried me through life while Madison had become the successful child. Then my father stood with a smile that could have fooled anyone who did not know him. He congratulated the bride and groom before turning his attention toward me. Without saying my name at first, he talked about how some children still depended on their parents for guidance and financial support. Guests slowly turned their heads toward my table. Then he laughed and proudly announced that he was still paying my college tuition, because I had not yet reached true independence. A few people chuckled politely while others looked at me with pity. Finally, he stretched out his hand and offered me the microphone, expecting a grateful thank you. I stood up, accepted the microphone, and took a slow breath. The room became completely silent. I smiled at Madison and Brandon first. "Congratulations to both of you. I truly hope you build a happy life together." Everyone applauded politely and my parents relaxed, believing I was about to thank them exactly as they had planned. Then I continued speaking. "There is something I should probably clear up. I was surprised to hear my father mention my college tuition because I actually graduated 6 months ago." The applause stopped instantly. My father looked confused, and my mother slowly lowered her glass. Several guests exchanged surprised looks while I calmly continued. "I finished my degree early after earning scholarships, completing internships, and working almost every weekend. A few weeks after graduation, I accepted a full-time position with a software company. Since then, I have been supporting myself completely. Nobody has paid my tuition for months because there has not been any tuition left to pay." The room became so quiet that I could hear glasses being placed on tables. I was not trying to embarrass anyone. I was simply correcting a story that should never have been told in the first place. Then an older woman sitting near the front smiled kindly and asked the question that changed everything. If you graduated 6 months ago, did your parents attend your graduation? I paused for only a second before answering honestly. No. They missed it because they were visiting wedding venues that weekend. A heavy silence spread across the ballroom. Nobody laughed this time. People were no longer looking at me with sympathy. They were looking at my parents with confusion. Without saying another negative word, I had revealed years of favoritism in one simple sentence. My father tried to interrupt, but nobody seemed interested anymore. The image they had carefully created throughout the evening had completely fallen apart. I handed the microphone back, congratulated the newlyweds one last time, and quietly walked toward the exit. Outside, the cool evening air felt lighter than it had in years. I realized I had never wanted revenge. I only wanted the truth to exist in the same room as the lies. Over the following months, my career continued growing, my savings increased, and I finally stopped chasing approval from people who had never truly seen my worth. Sometimes the greatest victory is not proving people wrong. It is quietly building a life so successful that their opinions no longer matter. My parents believed they controlled my future because they thought I still depended on them. What they never realized was that I had already built a future completely on my own.